For more than a decade now, a heartbreaking pattern has been repeating itself in UK maternity wards. You've probably heard the names: Morecambe Bay, East Kent, and the Shrewsbury and Telford scandal, the largest in NHS history. Inquiry after inquiry has uncovered the exact same devastating failures, but why? In this explainer, we're going to dig into the findings from these official reports to understand the systemic reasons these scandals keep happening, and ask if this tragic cycle can ever really be broken.
And this right here, this quote from a family member, it just cuts straight to the heart of the problem. It's not just that mistakes happened, it's the active, deliberate refusal to learn from them. These words capture that profound frustration of families who realized their tragedies weren't just preventable, but were followed by an actual effort to cover up the truth, which of course just guarantees it's going to happen to someone else.
So, this is the big question, isn't it? Why does this keep happening? We've had multiple multi-million-pound inquiries, all pointing to the same root causes, so what is stopping things from actually changing? Well, to get to the bottom of it, we need to look at three core themes that came up again and again in these reports, starting with the culture inside the hospitals themselves.
Okay, so the first huge pattern that investigators found across all of these scandals is a deeply ingrained defensive culture. And we're not just talking about poor communication here. We're talking about a systemic refusal to admit there were problems, a failure to listen to patients, and an absolute inability to accept accountability.
And that feeling, that banging your head against a brick wall, yeah, that was tragically common. You read these reports and they are just filled with stories from parents who felt completely dismissed and ignored. Another family told the Shrewsbury Inquiry that trying to get answers felt like the door had been slammed in my face. The reports make it clear this wasn't just an oversight, it was a cultural norm. And look, this defensive culture, it wasn't just pointed outwards at the patients, it was turned inward, creating what one staff member called a viper's nest. You had midwives and junior doctors who tried to raise the alarm about safety, and they were often bullied into silence. That meant chance after chance to flag dangerous practices and prevent harm was missed. Not because staff didn't see the problems, but because they were genuinely afraid to speak up.
And this slide, wow, it really lays out the two completely different realities, doesn't it? On one side, you have the devastating truth for families, what investigators later confirmed was repeated, avoidable harm. And on the other side, you have the official response from the trusts, dismissing these as isolated incidents and even attacking the critical reports as hearsay. This wall of denial made it pretty much impossible for the system to learn. So, a toxic culture on the ground is one massive problem. But you've got to ask, where were the regulators in all this? And that brings us to the second major theme. The inquiries found that the entire oversight system was fragmented, confusing, and totally ineffective at spotting that these units were failing so badly.
A huge part of the problem was just the constant merry-go-round of NHS bureaucracy. As you can see from this timeline, the organizations responsible for oversight were just reorganized again and again and again. The Morecambe Bay report called this a loss of corporate memory. Basically, no single organization was around long enough to have a clear view or take real responsibility for spotting these long-term patterns of failure. And if you want to see just how confusing that web of oversight got, just look at this table. You had all these different regulators supposedly watching the same trust, but none of them were connecting the dots. The Strategic Health Authority, they thought the deaths were just unconnected tragedies. The CQC, they just accepted action plans from the trust without even checking if the work had been done. Each body just kind of assumed another one had it covered, and so the problems fell right through the cracks.
The East Kent Inquiry actually gave this a name, and it's a powerful one: a failure in reading the signals. And the conclusion was absolutely damning. Instead of providing real tough oversight, the sheer number of regulators actually made things worse. It allowed the trust to focus on just managing those relationships rather than taking responsibility for fixing its own deadly services.
All right, so we've got a culture of denial, we've got a system of oversight that was completely broken, and all of that led directly to the third, and honestly, the most heartbreaking theme: the specific, repeated clinical errors that were happening right there at the bedside.
Just look at this number, 70%. According to the organization that handles negligence claims for the NHS, in 7 out of every 10 cases of severe brain injury during birth, there were problems monitoring the baby's heart rate. Let that sink in. This isn't some incredibly rare or complex procedure we're talking about. This is a failure in one of the absolute most fundamental parts of care during labor.
And believe me, that's not the only one. Not by a long shot. The exact same clinical failures pop up in every single one of these reports. Staff repeatedly misreading heart rate traces. Junior staff not escalating their concerns to senior doctors. Labor-inducing drugs being used in dangerous ways. And, very often, a cultural bias, a reluctance to perform cesarean sections even when it was absolutely critical. These weren't isolated mistakes. They were a clear pattern of failure.
This case study, it's just one example from the Ockenden report, but it shows exactly how all these different failures could combine into an absolute tragedy. You can see here, an oxytocin drip was started even when the baby was already showing signs of distress. It ultimately led to a devastating and, crucially, a preventable death. This is just one story, but it represents hundreds of others detailed in these inquiries.
So, after all of this, what's the consequence? The human cost, well, it's immeasurable, obviously, but the inquiries also highlight a staggering financial cost. And that really shows you the sheer scale of this problem and just how urgent it is to finally break this tragic cycle.
This chart tells a really shocking story. Just look at the bar on the left. Maternity incidents, they only make up about 12% of all negligence claims against the NHS. But now, look at the bar on the right. Those few claims account for a massive 62% of the total cost. And why is that? Because the harm caused is so severe, so catastrophic, often resulting in lifelong disability and the need for round-the-clock care. This isn't just a financial number. It's a direct measure of human tragedy.
So in response to all this, there is now this big national ambition to have these types of brain injuries. And it's a vital goal, for sure. It shows the scale of the problem is finally being recognized at the highest levels. But as we've just seen, actually achieving it means tackling something way more complex than just clinical practice. It means completely dismantling that culture of denial and fixing a deeply broken system of oversight.
And that leaves us with this final, really haunting question. A question that comes directly from the title of a parliamentary committee report from years ago. Given that these same failings have been identified again and again and again over more than a decade, is the system even capable of learning? The answer to that question is going to determine the safety of mothers and babies for years to come.